UFC Fight Night Vegas 80 Dawson versus Green takes place this weekend, and I'm going to go through the entire card, starting with the early prelims, ending with the main event, giving my prediction and breakdown for every single fight on the card, starting with the early prelim opener of Montana De La Rosa versus JJ Aldrich. I'm going to go with Montana De La Rosa here. I do believe that she's somewhat of an underrated female fighter. I know JJ Aldrich is coming off a win, and it's coming off a decent win-ish against Na Liang. Not the best of opponents, I get that. She wasn't very good whatsoever. But she lost to Lipski, she lost to Blanchfield, did all right in that fight. She has a bit of an iffy career where she might look good in this fight, but then go to a split decision with Courtney Casey. I don't mind Montana De La Rosa's chances here. She had a decent fight with Macy Barber, who's since gone on to beat Ribas. Decent round-ish with Tatiana Suarez at flyweight. Now Tatiana's moving down to strawweight. And she beat Ariane Lipski by finishing her in the second round in 2021. Around the same time, a bit later, that Ariane Lipski went on to beat JJ Aldrich. So I'm going to look at that similar opponent, and I'm going to go with Montana De La Rosa being a little bit too strong for JJ Aldrich. And I reckon she gets this one done. Slight reach advantage as well. JJ Aldrich, 2 hit and miss. I'm moving on. Up the card. Nate Maness versus Mendonca. This is a very interesting one. Nate Maness actually isn't half bad at bantamweight. He didn't have a good showing when he went down to flyweight. I think he went down to flyweight at some point, if I'm not mistaken here. Didn't have a great showing whatsoever against Tagirul and Bekov. Ended up getting finished. I think Mateus Mendonca is a little bit too dangerous for Nate Maness. And if you watch Nate Maness's fights, he had a really iffy fight against Gravely where he won it, and Gravely's not that bad, but also like he nearly got finished in the first round, barely survived it, came back to win in the second round afterwards. Like he got really badly hurt at the end of the first round. I watched it back. Really badly hurt. Came back to catch Tony Gravely in the second round. Outside of that, I've just never been wowed by Nate Maness, whereas I have been wowed by Mateus Mendonca. I think they're pretty even, but I don't mind that Mendonca gave a decent account of himself against Javid Basharat, who I think is one of the better prospects right now in the bantamweight division. So I'm going to go with Mendonca. I think he has the finishing potential advantage, and I reckon he's going to beat Nate Maness. Nate Maness has been too bad looking in his last 2 fights, and I don't like the attitude. If Mendonca fought Umar, sure he might get finished, sure he might lose, he probably would, but at least he would give a fight. Nate Maness just conceded bottom position, and then also just chucked himself into a guillotine against Dylan Bekov. Rookie mistakes. Mendonca will find a way to finish that if he gives him the chance. We move on. Up the card to another fight between Vennessa Demopoulos and Kanako Murata. I'm going to have to go against Vennessa Demopoulos here. I don't mind Kanako Murata in comparison. She's had a bit of time off. Haven't really seen her recently in the cage. Hasn't fought since 2021. I like that a little bit. Take a bit of time off. She got hurt in the fight against Verna Jandaroba anyway with a shoulder injury. So she had some time off to recover. Probably worked on her game in the meantime. Beat Emily Ducote, which I think is a pretty decent win. And that was on the regional scene where Ducote actually built a bit of momentum from and then went on to get into the UFC. Beat some decent opponents on the regional scene. The 7-2 opponent. Rear naked choke in the first round. Some, like, veteran, it's hard to say that they're good in the women's regional MMA, but some veteran fighters. She fought an 18-2 fighter when she was 3-0. I like that confidence. She did go out there and lose in the third round, but Vennessa Demopoulos, a little bit more coddled of her career. Beat Jinyu Freight, got gifted a decision. The Maria Oliveira decision was also kind of interesting as well. I just feel like there's another situation where she's 0-3 in the UFC, or sorry, 1-3 in the UFC. She did beat Silvana Gomez Juarez with an armbar. Got dropped in the first round there. I reckon Kanako Murata is a little bit more consistent of a decent fighter than Vennessa Demopoulos, and I think that's going to lead to her getting this one done. Potentially by finish. I'll probably say a close competitive decision though instead. We move on. Up the card. Johnny Munoz Jr. versus Aori Qileng. Now this is an interesting one. Because Johnny Munoz Jr. is another one of these fighters recently that's been in the UFC where I just don't notice anything too special about him. However, he didn't look half bad against Daniel Santos. He lost, but he didn't do terribly. The Ludwig Shalinian fight, Ludwig is one of the worst fighters with a name that should be... Ludwig Shalinian, you read that name, read where he's from, you think, oh my god, this guy's going to be a monster. One of the most overrated guys we've seen in the UFC. Aori Qileng, very dangerous, lost to Amian Zahabi. The problem I'm having with Aori Qileng is that he seems also quite finishable, even though he's quite tough himself. And Daniel Santos is a really good finisher. He's like the bantamweight Oliveira as we know him. And I don't think if Daniel Santos can't finish Johnny Munoz Jr. and he shows enough striking defense not to get finished by him, I think he can come back in the later rounds if he needs to, or even mix in some grappling on Aori Qileng. I just don't think Qileng is as much of a threat at bantamweight than he is at flyweight. And I reckon I'm going to have to go with Johnny Munoz Jr. I think he's consistently okay enough throughout the distance of the fight, whereas Aori Qileng is just sort of dangerous in round one and then plummets off a cliff in terms of how dangerous he is. So I'm going to go Johnny Munoz Jr. I would say a good odds bet to make on this is to say if you see Aori Qileng winning the first round and he's up on the odds, maybe put some money on Munoz Jr. because we have seen Qileng gas out a bunch in his career. We move on. Up the card, Chris Gutierrez versus Montel Jackson. I'm going to go with Montel Jackson over Chris Gutierrez, you know. I think I'm going to risk that pick. I don't mind Montel Jackson's chances here. I know Chris Gutierrez didn't look half bad against Pedro Munoz, but it was such a sparring session of a fight. It's kind of like, I mean, no doubt he looked good. It was like Munoz was just going tit for tat with him. And then after rocking him in the first round, just a little bit of 2 rounds of tit for tat, basically, between the two of them. Montel Jackson has a 75.5-inch reach in the bantamweight division. He has heavyweight-sized hands, 31 years of age, coming into his prime. I've always complained about him not being too active, but now he's started to pick it up a little bit. Well, has he? I mean, he's been a bit more active, you know. I mean, this will be his 3rd fight in the space of 365 days. I think that's going to be good for him. I think we're finally going to see the good version of Montel Jackson. He lost to Brett Johns, a Welshman, shout out, a while ago in the UFC. That was his 2nd loss in the UFC outside of Ricky Simone. And both of them just had to wet blanket him against a cage. They were worried about his stand-up. He looked good in those fights, and we've seen what Ricky Simone has become. Although losing to Song Yudong, he's a top 15 dude. I'm going to side with Montel Jackson here over Chris Gutierrez. I think Gutierrez, although good, and although did land that spinning back fist on Dana Batgarel, I am going to have to go with Montel Jackson. I think there's a solid chance that he could catch Chris Gutierrez, and I don't really like the finishing potential from Chris Gutierrez on Montel Jackson. He's not going to catch him with a knee up the middle. Maybe I'm jinxing this, who knows. I don't see a spinning back fist coming out of nowhere. I reckon if they have a striking match where there isn't a crazy, wacky moment from Gutierrez where he ends up getting the win, I reckon we're going to see a situation where Montel Jackson can outstrike him on the feet and have those moments where maybe he wins by decision by dropping Gutierrez in 2 of the 3 rounds. I could see that. Massive reach advantage, size advantage, hand size advantage. Jackson's pretty dangerous. I reckon he'll knock down Gutierrez enough to get this one done by decision. We move on. Up the card, Karolina Kowalkiewicz versus Diana Belbita. I'm going to go with Karolina Kowalkiewicz over Diana Belbita. Not the most confident, but I think I'm all right with this one. Karolina Kowalkiewicz actually looked really good in her last fight, like really underratedly good against Vennessa Demopoulos. Bodied her in that fight, dominated her in that fight. Bunch of shots landing. Looked good against Silvana Gomez Juarez as well. She's on a 3-fight win streak after being on such a loss streak. There was a time where she didn't have confidence being on that many losses in a row, where fighters were like, oh, I'm going to be the next one to beat her. Now she's building up some momentum. She's getting some confidence. And although Diana Belbita's kind of hot, I just don't rate a win over Maria Oliveira. You know what I mean? I really don't anymore. You know what I mean? Gloria De Paula lost that fight. Beat Hannah Goldie. Welcome to the Molly McCann club. You know what I'm saying? It's just not... These aren't great wins. Liana Jujua finished her, and Jujua is a model on Instagram that fights per time. Lost to Molly McCann. These are the worrisome moments, okay? We don't see that on Kowalkiewicz's career. We see losses to, Jessica Penne, that is not a good one, but Yan Xiaonan, Alexa Grasso by decision, Michelle Waterson, Jessica Andrade, in a better time when she actually fought Ioanni and Jacek, Claudia Gadelia. Other than that, she's doing all right against the next level down, and beat Nami Yunus back in the day, so... With momentum, on her best night, I think Kowalkiewicz can get this one done. We move on up the card. Bill Algeo versus Alexander Hernandez. I'm going Bill Algeo. I think he's very tricky to finish, and I don't like Hernandez at featherweight. That's how I felt about Alexander Hernandez. I think his chances at lightweight, because he looked all right against Jim Miller, you know. He actually looked pretty decent, and Jim Miller's no joke. If you're not good enough, Miller's going to smoke you. Seems to be that way. But I am going to have to go with Algeo here because he's very difficult to finish. Underrated record on him right now as well. TJ Brown beat him in the second round with a rear naked choke. He does goofy stuff where he can end up in a very opportunistic situation out of nowhere. And I can see Hernandez making those mistakes to where Algeo is going to be able to capitalize on an opportunity out of nowhere. It's just one of those fights where I can sense it. Like Hernandez doing good, doing all right. Oh, Algeo's on his back. You know what I mean? I can see that. It's a very obvious thing that maybe potentially could happen. And also, I just think Algeo is very underrated in general. He's a tricky fighter to beat. Very, very tricky fighter to beat, may I add. He has a win over Joanderson Brito, which is a very underrated win. He looked amazing against Herbert Burns as well, sorry. Exhaustion from damage was the listed reason for why that one happened. I'm going to go with Algeo. I don't see Hernandez winning this for long enough to secure himself the victory. I see Algeo coming back in those later rounds and maybe getting himself a third round finish over Alexander Hernandez. Submission, TKO, something along those lines. I'm going with El Señor Perfecto, Algeo. And he has a moment on the microphone afterwards as well, I imagine. I reckon he beats Hernandez. I just don't see Hernandez with the finishing potential at featherweight that he had at lightweight. I think his speed at lightweight was kind of helpful for him. Featherweight's a very hard division to get finishes in. And if you can't go 3 rounds, like Hernandez consistently can't seem to be able to do, and couldn't at featherweight, he gassed after round 1 against Quarantillo, and it weren't even a high-paced round. Gonna have to go with Algeo, getting this one done. We move on. Up the card, Philipe Lins versus Ion Cutelaba. You know what? Ion Cutelaba's getting it done. Go on then. You know what I mean? Go on then, Cutelaba. Let's see what you got, dude. One more time into the fray. Are you going to get finished or are you going to finish your opponent? He beat Tanabosa, and I think that's an underrated win. And Tanabosa smoked Philipe Lins at heavyweight as well. KO'd him badly. Philipe Lins has got momentum, but he's got momentum against these older fighters who don't have that fast twitch in him anymore, and he's able to sort of cruise his way into the fight. Beats OSP, beats Maxim Grishin as well. These are decent fighters, by the way, pretty decent fighters, but they're getting older, and they don't have that twitch, that danger factor that Ion Cutelaba has in the first round, where it's like, oh god, watch your P's and Q's, or you could get finished real quick. I reckon Cutelaba, he's young. Cutelaba's a young dude. He's 29 years of age. I feel like he's been in the UFC for a decade. He might have been. Well, how long has he been in the UFC since? Not a decade, obviously, but he's been in the UFC since 2000. We're getting close. Since 2016. Serkinov fought Cannonier, fought Antigulov, beat him, fought Teixeira, had him nearly out of there in the first round. Welcome to the Teixeira Fight Club. Khalil Roundtree dominated him, beat him. Ankalaev, the weird one in the first, and he got finished in the second. I fell for the bait, accidentally picked him, whatever. Beat Devin Clark. These are good wins. Tanabosa loses to Ryan Spann. There's a Chukwu Johnny Walker. If you don't have a massive size advantage over him, I feel like Cutelaba's got a solid shot. And I don't think Philipe Lins' finishing potential is all that great. So, if someone's getting a finish in the first, I think it's Cutelaba. And that's why I'm going to bet on him to win. We move on. Up the card, Drew Dober versus Ricky Glenn. Now, I know what you're thinking. He's going to let Ricky Glenn win. No. Drew Dober has organised for someone to chuck Nutella on the face of Ricky Glenn as he walks out to the cage. And for this reason, I'm going with Drew Dober. Racially motivated Dober is not beatable in the lightweight division. And if he can really squint hard enough, maybe he could bring down the shade of Ricky Glenn a couple of levels. You never know what the mind can do. No, but seriously, Ricky Glenn looked like an absolute OAP in his last fight. This is a great card, by the way. It's not like huge names, but I like every fight on it. He looked like an absolute old age pensioner against Christos Giagos. I know he looked good against Grant Dawson, but sometimes these fights happen. One person's injured, one person's not. Dawson gets better because he's a young fighter. Looks amazing against Amiris Magulov. Ricky Glenn ain't half bad, but in his last fight against Christos Giagos, where he's now 34 years of age, when I tell you he looked like an OAP out there, he looked like such a victim out there. So slow, so predictable. I don't know if he's hit a wall and his injuries have just tallied up a bit too much. I don't see him ragdolling Dober. Dober's got decent takedown defense if you ain't Islam Makhachev or Dariush. And even then, he was able to fought off Dariush for a bit. Dariush had to go for like a triangle armbar from an inverted position. It was a weird one. I'm going to have to go with Drew Dober. I'm going to go Drew Dober over Ricky Glenn. I know it's not his favorite opponent to fight, but I think Ricky Glenn, coming off a KO loss, going in there against Drew Dober, although you could say Dober's chin has been cracked, Fravola's ginger. Different level of power, different level of steam. Ginger steam on the chin. I'm going to have to go Drew Dober over Ricky Glenn. Too old, too robotic, too rusty. Gonna have to go with Drew Dober getting this one done by TKO. Ricky Glenn stands very upright as well. Could see the body shots landing from Dober. I'm gonna go late first round KO from Dober. We move on. Up the card, Alex Morono versus Joaquin Buckley. I'm going Joaquin Buckley over Alex Morono. I actually don't mind this matchup for him. I know a win over Fialho does not look good in hindsight because it's like, who hasn't beaten Andre Fialho at this point? But Alex Morono, he seems to be in a situation where he's still getting hit by these shots. Beats Tim Means, not a bad win, don't get me wrong. I don't see him taking down and subbing Joaquin Buckley at any moment in this fight. I see it being a stand-up fight where basically Morono's going to be trying to pick and make it to a decision outpointing Joaquin Buckley, and I think Buckley's going to be trying to take his head off. And the intention of the two of them being that different, I think is going to give Joaquin Buckley a bit of an opportunity to land something big, get a big shot going, get a TKO off, and get something big in this fight. There's 3 rounds where Morono has to be perfect, and he was doing great against Ponzinibbio, but then boom, shot lands in round 3, puts him out pretty badly. And outside of that, the Semmelsberger win hasn't aged too well. Who's Zawada anymore? Mickey Gall's win hasn't. Look at the wins. Cerrone, fell off a cliff. Reese McKee win, who cares? It was a very competitive, close fight as well. David Zawada, Mickey Gall, Matt Semmelsberger got smoked in his last fight by a moving up Uros Medic. I feel like although these guys are dangerous, Morono taking him to a decision, I don't think he survives 15 minutes with Joaquin Buckley without getting hit with something goofy, something crazy. And I do think there's going to be an intention difference between the two of them. Joaquin Buckley gets this one done, and that's what's going to happen. TKO Joaquin Buckley, second round is what I'm going to go with. He's big for welterweight as well, by the way. I mean, Alex Morono's a big dude as well. 5'11", 72 inches of reach. But Joaquin Buckley is a big, stocky dude for the division. 5'10", 60, 76 inch reach. I'm going with Joaquin Buckley getting it done. We move on. Up the card, Joe Pyfer versus Abdul Razak Alhassan. I'm going to go Joe Pyfer. I think when you got 2 first round finishers, this ain't leaving the first round in my opinion. Someone's getting knocked out. We'll see how it goes. When you got 2 first round finishers, Pyfer's a bit more consistent in doing so. Did it to Meerschaert, did it to Amadovsky, not a great win, but did it to the guy on the Contender Series in the second though. But he's got a lot of those. I think he's been more consistent as of recently with those first round abilities. I also think if they're going to grapple, I watched Pyfer out-grapple Meerschaert in Fury Pro Grappling 7. Live, I watched it. And I watched Fury Pro Grappling 6. Jesus, I'm ill. Fury Pro Grappling 6 live and watched him easily ragdoll Eric Anders, who's a big dude. If they need to grapple, Pyfer's got the edge. On the feet, between the two of them, they're both going to be dangerous. Pyfer's got a 2-inch reach advantage over him, and Pyfer is a big middleweight. Legit 6'2". I don't think he'd be out-heighted much by Israel Adesanya, and he's not built like Israel Adesanya. He's a massive dude, training at a great gym. I think in the case that both of them are looking for a KO in round 1, the intimidation factor of Pyfer is going to be more than the intimidation factor of Abdul Razak Alhassan. Also, Buckley's quite chinny, and Abdul couldn't KO him in that fight. So, I reckon Pyfer would have caught Buckley and finished him with the power he seems to have. I think Pyfer just beats him in all the statistics. Younger, on momentum, 27, 75 inches of reach, 2-inch reach advantage. Gonna have a size advantage as well. I think that'll be a big intimidation factor for this fight, and I reckon he'll get a first round TKO. Risky though, might be worth putting some money on an underdog, who knows. We move on. Up the card, Grant Dawson versus Bobby Green. This is an interesting one. Because Bobby Green, there is a world, and I know some of you have considered this as well, although you're probably going to be picking Grant Dawson, and 91% of people are, Bobby Green can wrestle. And Ricky Glenn had a decent performance against Grant Dawson. But with Grant Dawson, what I'm starting to think is you can't judge him from his last fight. We've got to see what he's done recently. And he looked great against Madsen, beat Jared Gordon and submitted him, and dominated Damir Ismagulov. I did not see that coming. Sometimes guys just hit that second stride. He's coming into his prime as well, 29 years of age. I see it as a sign that he is improving. We can't judge him off of those performances a couple of years ago. He's being a lot better, a lot more confident, training at ATT. And Bobby Green, although good, and maybe I could see him coming back in the later rounds, he's still 37 years of age. You know what I mean? He's still giving up reach here to Grant Dawson. 37, not getting any younger. I don't see him improving between these fights. And one thing I don't like is when Bobby Green knows he's going to fight a grappler. For a training camp, Bobby Green knows he's going to fight a grappler. I'd almost prefer it if Bobby Green stepped in on short notice. When you get an older fighter, 37 years of age, not just to go through a training camp, a grappling training camp at that age, I think it's risky for injury. I think we're not going to see the best Bobby Green here, whereas I can trust Grant Dawson to show up in shape, on point, good version of himself, and potentially get a rear naked choke over Bobby Green. I do see him getting the back. I do see him out wrestling Bobby Green. On the feet, it's a bit worrying, but I do like his calf kicks. And at the end of the day, as much as Bobby Green was looking good against Tony Ferguson and all right against Dober as well, Dawson's a bit more elusive on the feet. He's not going to charge forward and be there to hit. And that's where Bobby Green can piece up a Dober for a bit. Piece up a Ferguson. Piece up a Nasrat Haqparast. Although they're maybe better strikers than Dawson, they're not elusive. They're there. They're in your face, and that's what Bobby Green loves. Fiziev as well. You know what I mean? He's not scooting around on the outside. He was charging forward in that fight. Now, the one guy that gave Bobby Green problems on the feet before he clashed heads with him that looked intentional was Jared Gordon was actually on the back foot, making Bobby Green go first and tagging him with good shots in that fight. So, I reckon if Dawson is elusive, on the back foot, moves around a lot, picks with kicks, times his takedowns well, one, I reckon he can catch Bobby Green on the feet trying to go first. And if Bobby Green tries to go first, because Dawson ain't going to be charging forwards, I reckon he can time his takedowns and time some shots on the feet as well that can then lead into those takedowns. I'm going to go Grant Dawson, rear naked choke, round 3. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Toodle pip. I'll see you later. Goodbye.